need to put a banner up on our Twitter. That's embarrassing.
I don't think that's the most important matter right now.
I think that's the first thing people need to hear when they're listening today. We don't have a banner on our Twitter. Y'all, it's heartrending. We have no banner.
The sad thing is, I just remembered I don't have the notes up on the computer because otherwise it like glares my glasses. So I have to open them up on my phone, so that's what I'm doing right now.
Don't worry, luckily for you, I've got an old tiny TV that I use as a second screen. And on that, I do have the notes up. Tiny
Hooray!
TV, thank you for assistance. Let's see, oh, we're doing the loose, cold, open riffing, and then I'm supposed to say, I'm Noah, I'm your newbie for the week.
And I'm Taylor, I'm your host.
And then I think we have a catchphrase in here. Oh, something's happened. Our catchphrase has been knocked aside. What's going on? What's going on?
Nothing's happened. I have
Nothing's
this in
happened.
the wrong boxes.
What do you mean nothing's happened? It's a gasp that implies something has happened. What's happened or not happened?
I had us in the wrong boxes. You were Taylor and I was Noah for like a moment.
Oh boy.
It's fine.
Oh,
It's
I'm
fine.
sure it's fine. Let's just watch the faces slide across on your screen while we just sit statically in my
I already
screen.
fixed it. It's done.
It's all fixed. Wonderful. Okay. Where were we? Oh yeah.
And
Hey. Did you know that I didn't catch the Bifrost Incident by the mechanisms? Just a fun fact.
No, I did not know that. I wonder why we would be talking about it if I had no idea. Noah, you really gotta stop planning these episodes all on your own.
I just locked myself up in the you didn't catch that cave, and I maniacally plot around all of our plans. And you say, Noah, you've got some very weird plans here. No marketing, no real technical investment, just kind of like doing it every week. This seems like a weird stratagem. And I say, no, that's the brilliant part. And you say, maybe we should communicate a bit. I mean, yeah, you've got it all adding up right now, but maybe one day you pick something that you want me to host that I haven't actually seen. And I say, I don't need your thoughts and opinions, Taylor. I brought you on to get the eyeballs on our work. I'm the brains.
Oh yeah, because I'm the only one who tagged shit. Anyways. So Noah, how come you haven't caught the Bifrost Incident? Like, it's Norse mythology, rock, folk album, music, like, kind of seems up your alley.
And the truth of the matter is, it very much is. As someone that was a big fan of Jeff Lane's War of the Worlds, come next week, I really enjoyed this. A lot of fun stuff. I love the science fiction. I love the horror. As someone that's listened to way too much Gaelic Storm, I love where the mechanisms tend to go with their rock when they want to have a fun, soft ballad time. It's a fun time. I enjoyed it. Why didn't I catch it? I just don't listen to new things. That's what the podcast is for.
I'm really genuinely concerned for you and about you with just how little of new stuff you take in, unless, like, it has a lot of commercials about it at the moment.
I really am very basic, you have to understand. I'm just like wrapping myself up in a little katamari of like whatever comes in my way, and that's just my cultural object collecting methodology.
Okay,
Just get rolled around by the system.
Even though you don't get introduced to new stuff unless, like, it's a family movie, I, on the other hand, am constantly taking in new media. Even when it's old media by the time I'm listening to it, which is like 3 years late, but that's all right.
Yes, the ancient age of 3.
Hey, media ages differently. Media ages differently than humans. I don't know what to tell you. But I actually found out about this album simply because of Ragnarok 2 Strange Meeting.
Oh yeah?
That's Ragnarok 3. That specific track is actually how I found out about this entire album, which led me to the entire band and led me
Oh,
to
wow.
the other album that we listened to last week. The Bifrost Incident was actually my first album by the Mechanisms. And the reason
It
for
was
that was...
the Bifrost was your gate into a new and haunting realm, maybe?
Can
Would
you
be how you'd phrase
understand?
that?
Can you understand why, like, I had no idea who the Mechanisms were the first few times I listened to the albums?
I can definitely understand not having any idea who the Mechanisms were as you were introduced to the first Mechanisms tracks you'd ever listened to.
Yeah. But, like, it took me until I listened to Tales to Be Told to really pinpoint their personalities, because I could never tell which of the Mechanisms were who, because this one only has 3 in-verse mechanisms, and they're there for 5 seconds, and then they're gone. So I just
Time to
thought
make
it
our
was a bunch of
obligatory
different
cameo.
sci-fi stuff that they were
It's
singing about.
And it definitely delivers on the sci-fi stuff, and then
Oh,
it gets bored
definitely.
and decides it's time for a different genre entirely.
But I found out about this through that song because there was an animatic recommended to me by YouTube
Oh yeah.
that was very specific, that played part of that song. I don't believe it was the whole song, but it was part of it. And I kept replaying the part where they said, die in peace, die with honor. And I just kept replaying that part over and over again. I'm like, I want to hear what the rest of this is, because I know this isn't the full song, but I love these lyrics and I want to know more. And then that's how we got here today.
Those lyrics really capture a lot of like the Norse heart of this, beating within the space train and the surprise Lovecraft. It's very like, it's got that same sort of ethos of the blood and the gore and the, oh, it's all going to go really badly in the end, but we're gonna fight and die anyway.
Basically.
Except it's not like a cheerful sort of absurdism. It's like a, well, you know,
we all die.
another
You
kind
might
of
as well like
absurdism.
share it.
Oh boy. But dang. So is this, you know, we haven't covered, how is the Mechanisms just like all the albums and some of your favorite tracks just part of like your normal listening diet?
Sometimes. So I go through phases where I'm into really specific genres.
Unsurprising.
Yes. And anytime I'm in a rock mood, but I don't feel like playing like an Aerosmith album that I've heard 100 times or Metallica or anything, I'll just go to the Mechanisms. They're kind of like an alternative rock where like you don't hear them on the radio, so sometimes you can just play them a couple times without getting sick of them really quickly.
Oh yeah.
Because all the other like classic rock albums I listened to is because my mom was really into them growing up. So I get tired of them really quickly because I heard them all the time, but like not the Mechanisms. So while I wouldn't say they are like a regular part of my diet, if I want to listen to like some alternative rock folk, I will turn them on. If I'm listening to like a lot of Heather Dale and I wanna like flip it up a little bit, I'll throw on some Mechanisms as well. Yeah, but anyways, so I wouldn't say it's part of my regular diet, but it is it is a regular part of my diet when I'm in the mood for them.
So what did you think I was gonna think of this, especially after we watched Once Upon a Time in Space 2 weeks ago?
So Once Upon a Time in Space is where I figured would be the easier introduction for you into what the Mechanisms are and who they are. Which is why we started there. And I wasn't sure if you would like it so much as like you would be able to enjoy some of the songs very specifically enough for us to talk about them. This one I expected you to enjoy. Maybe I was kind of on the concern because I know how you get about Marvel characters in comics, and I was waiting for you to complain about modern Thor and Loki while we were talking about this in the preamble, but you didn't, so I think we're in the safe zone here. I don't think we have to worry about random Marvel's
Tangents. That too.
That too.
I'm not going to besmirch the Mechanisms with complaints about, you know, whatever the mouse is doing. It's funny, you know, it's funny that you put so much emphasis on the Mechanisms and like them as like in-song diegetic characters, but they seem to continue to not actually matter at all.
Basically.
Which it's sort of funny. So I have to assume that was like that point of confusion about what they were and what their deal was kind of like a
Yeah.
thing that really bugged you initially.
Oh yeah, no, because they kept getting brought up and they kept saying what they were doing in the areas, and I knew who Johnny DeVille was, and I knew who the Tin Soldier was, the toy soldier was, but I didn't know who anybody else was. I didn't understand what they were doing there. I understood these two were immortals. Were the rest immortal? What is going on? So I Googled and I did a lot of reading so I could understand.
Well, if it's any consolation, I am like 1,000% totally cool with like weird OC characters popping up, doing weird stuff, and then popping out because they do seem to like know how to do that role properly and
Yeah.
like not, make it engaging and also not steal the spotlight any more than like a comic relief character like that is supposed to.
But see,
But I also appreciate knowing the context.
here's the thing. Characters like that, when they appear in every single album and they're constantly mentioned, but you don't know the whole story, bug the shit out of me. I need to know.
I can see how that would drive you crazy. I totally get that.
I need to know, why are you the way you are? I'm fine with you popping in and out, but I need answers.
When we get to the next album, and remind me what the next album is called. 2 more episodes down the line.
It's the haunting of Carmen. Hang on.
It's Carmen Miranda, right?
Yes, the haunting of Carmen Miranda.
Oh yeah.
And it's all about a space. It's all about different stories that happen in space. I am on like a music sci-fi kick, and I won't apologize. Y'all just have to sit through this shit.
Oh, we're doing it together. Guys, next week, like I said, Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds, classic rock opera about a classic bit of sci-fi. Oh boy. Anyway, can we look forward to more of the mechanisms in the Mechanisms album, or will they maintain the same sort of we're just passing through here kind of presence?
I don't remember much about their presence in the King Arthur album. However, which is called High Noon and Camelot, it's basically cowboys with King Arthur characters.
Of course it is. Of course it is.
They do a lot in Ulysses.
Mm-hmm.
Which, Greek names, I'm awful at pronouncing, like, English names. What the fuck do you expect from me? I'm sorry. Okay.
So, what about, and Carmen Miranda, do you have any memory of their presence, or?
No, Carmen Miranda is a completely different band. It came out in, like, the 70s, I think. The 70s or 80s. It has a bunch of other folk artists I listen to a lot that are on it, and that's why we're going to be listening to that, because I figured you'd be getting tired of the Mechanisms.
I figured we'd be like doing like the hat trick of Mechanisms albums.
Nah, Carmen is something entirely different, and it's really difficult to find all the music too that's from that album because it's so old.
I look forward to you sending me all the shady links to get my hands on it. But for now, let's talk about the Bifrost Incident. And I guess as it happened, what is going on in the Bifrost Incident? Luckily for us, I think the plot of this one is a lot more straightforward in a lot of ways than Once Upon a Time in Space. It doesn't have like the big crazy political drama. I mean, it has some big crazy space opera political drama, but mostly it just,
all the characters actually make sense knowing each other, and it's not a bunch of fairy tales mashed together. So what happens in the Bifrost Incident is Odin is a tyrannical leader who rules over Midgardians and Asgardians for 1,000 years. And there are people who are part of the Midgardian resistance who hate this shit and is sick of Odin and wants to get rid of them. This includes Loki, Fenrir, and Sigyn. And, the Asgardians are not okay with that, even though most of them also don't like Odin. So what happens with that is, Loki and the Resistance launch 2 missiles, and Missile 2 kills Baldur. And Is it Baldier or Balder?
Balder. Well,
Balder.
that's how they pronounce it. I have no idea.
Okay.
Apologies to my Icelandic relatives for all of our attempts at pronouncing the Norse gods.
Uh, I
It
don't.
we'll go with Balder. I think that's like the
Okay.
normal
So,
anglicization.
Mistletoe kills Balder, and for that crime, Loki is sentenced to death and is set on fire as punishment. And everybody watches Loki die. But turns out Odin lied. Loki's alive because Odin needed her around to help rebuild the train and keep it running because the Rastaltalk
The
train
Ratatosk.
Ratatosk train
Wait, this is
needs
familiar.
Loki and Odin both to run.
Haven't we been here before, struggling to pronounce Ratatosk?
Oh shit! No! Don't! We're not going down that way! Quick! Distract you!
Wait,
Anyways,
whoa,
then
Ham.
Sigyn invades the train, which has all of the Asgardian upper class people on it all at once. And her and a bunch of the other resistance pose as crew on the train to try and destroy it in honor of Loki, because Fenrir's in prison now, and Sigyn is the highest ranking member that's still alive. Thor finds out Loki is alive and is pissed because Loki's mind has been like fucked with to the point where she no longer recognizes herself. And Thor's like, "What's up, Mom? Why did you do this?" and confronts Odin. And Odin's like, "I had a reason. Either shut up and get in line, or you're fired and you can get off the train at the next stop." So there's a whole argument. Thor frees Loki, making it seem like an accident. Sigyn finds Loki and gets her out of there. And the rest of the train ride is Thor trying to stop Odin from killing everybody. Loki and Sigyn are just trying to survive and destroy this train. Odin's trying to summon a Cthulhu god to eat everything and become one with darkness. And all the other Asgardians are just there because they're upper class rich folk and they thought this would be a pleasurable experience. What was supposed to take a 2-hour train ride turns into 80 years trapped in darkness as Loki's blood drip. I guess I skipped.
You're getting ahead of yourself here, I think.
I'm trying to like summarize it quickly so we could get to the actual discussion.
The twist that we get to is that this magnificent train that's supposed to take a 3-month, trip between worlds and turn into 3 days, this big master mechanism that Odin has spent decades constructing, the Bifrost, the Bifrost name of the rails and the Ratatosk, the name of the ship that rides the rails, it actually turns out is riding through the rainbow-colored being of Ygg-Shoggoth, the Lovecraftian god, and father of Cthulhu and all sorts of nastiness, the gate between all, and evil, crazy Cthulhu stuff. It's powered by blood, this engine that goes through Ygg-Shoggoth. It's powered by the blood of a Midgardian terrorist that we come across in the middle of the events. And looks like trying to shut the engine off has actually ripped open a tear to the domain of Ygg-Shoggoth and all the squamous things within. It's all very squamous in there. Just all kinds of squamous, shivering and undulating squamous things.
By the way, Thor and Sigyn find the terrorist hooked up to the machine, and Sigyn, recognizing him and being friends with him, tried to free him, while Thor's just like, "What the fuck has Odin been doing?"
So we go to confront Odin, while the madness spreads, and people start killing each other and being melted into one with the ship and all sorts of appropriately Lovecraftian things. And looks like Odin's become one with Ygg-Shoggoth, is totally 1000% down with spreading, their influence to all the realms, and also has become like this giant, freakish, squamous, snaky thing that we're going to pretend is Jormungandr. I'm definitely pronouncing that one wrong, but we're going to call it Jormungandr. Anyway, Thor have a battle. It goes badly for both of them.
Thor finishes it off by using his hammer to break open a window, and they get launched into space, leaving only Loki and Sigyn, the last 2 people alive.
And then Loki's like, well, we can't let this happen. We can't stop it. So let's just keep the train a going for a while. I'll hook myself up, be the new engine for as long as possible, and hopefully delay the inevitable a bit. And Sigurd's like, well, this is horrible. Let's have a song about the tragedy of our circumstance as lovers, because this does seem to be a thing that happens in the mechanisms a lot, the tragedy of lovers. And dang, is it not tragic and a sad track, this one. Anyway, Loki
Holy
plugs herself
shit. The
into the engine.
And for 80 years, her blood drips, drop by drop, keeping the train going. But Sigurd's like, it's gonna be painful, and it's gonna be a long time, and it's gonna suck. So, I'm only gonna hook one wire up to you. That's enough to keep the train going. It'll slow it down, and you won't die immediately. So we have a few years to spend together as I die of not having anything to eat and drink, and you die of being hooked up to the train.
It's great. It's fine.
It's sad.
It's sad. Cut to the frame story where Lieutenant Lefrancier Etta, that's a reference.
So glad you said that.
Etta, who's been investigating this through the black box and also consulting this weird group of weirdos called the Mechanisms, realizes, the train has arrived, and now that I've watched the black box, I know what that means. Looks like I was a Lovecraft protagonist the whole time. It's time to get out of Dodge before things go sideways, and then things go sideways.
And the last song is called Terminus, and it's just, you hear a bunch of different sirens going out, calls for help, as they slowly all start to go off at once and then die until it's silence. And it's so sad because hell, the prison where Fenrir and a bunch of other people are kept, is one of the loudest, and it was constantly mentioned, but you don't know any of the people besides Fenrir who's in there, and so you're just hearing everybody, all these prisoners scream for help. Oh, it was so sad.
And then the album's over.
It's over. That's how it ends.
Hope you had a good one. This isn't one of those happy stories featuring the words Ragnarok in several track titles.
Okay, but when have I ever brought us a happy story to talk about on this show? All of mine are kind of depressing. Even Puff the Magic Dragon had a depressing undertone.
Yeah, I was definitely about to bring Puff up as a positive example, and then I remembered how Puff ended, and now I'm thinking about the other dragon one you brought up and how that ended, and I'm like, maybe you're the depressing influence on this show. I guess we'll find out when we listen to the one I bring next time, which has a very cynical take on humanity in general. Next week. Look forward to that one.
When I'm introduced to cynical stuff that's meant to be cynical, I always take positive notes with it. When I'm introduced to anything that's supposed to be hopeful, I'm always approaching with a bunch of cynicism. I don't know why. This is just how I am. I need to be controversial to what I'm intaking.
It's good. It's helpful. It's productive. Or maybe it's not. Mm-hmm. But it's certainly going to generate a lot of conversations. And that's really why we're here. So now that we've kind of worked our way through how things happen.
Oh, side note real quick. Odin and Loki are both women in this.
Yes, that is one of the shifts they take, which is fun. So, hey, on that note, can we just start talking about Odin? Because, I really did like Odin in this one.
Okay, yes, please explain why you like Odin so much, because I don't get it. I've listened to this album a dozen times, and Odin still is, one of the most underwhelming characters in all of it for me, and I'm really curious, why does she stick out so much to you?
Well, the first off is the performer who's doing Odin just has a great voice, and I find it really engaging among the cast. For some reason, I just really enjoy her tone and the kind of mannerism she takes to the performances she gives, and just kind of the general vibe of her songs, especially her titular, the first song that she does, just the second track on the album there, Odin, is a real bop, and I really enjoyed just her as a performer. And so whenever Odin would appear in a song, I would get really excited, oh boy, Odin's back. Can't wait to listen to her.
So Odin is one of the two characters played by the same people.
Oh
So
yeah.
Odin is played by Raphella, who is one of the mechanists one of the three mechanists that were locked up. The only other person who plays two people is Thor, is played by Marius, one of the other mechanisms locked up, and everybody
Mm.
else is played by one individual person. Nobody
Well,
else gets two in this one, which makes it a little easier for me to follow.
hats off to her. She did a great job. I also just like just the vibe of her character. I think that it comes off very unique. She starts off as, Odin as tyrannical space colonialist and,
Yeah.
dictator, classic take, classic take. And then like, in sync with the rest of the story, basically, the moment it turns out that Yog-Sothoth, actual Lovecraft character, was behind it all, she turns on a dime and suddenly is doing the Lovecraft villain thing just excellently. I love some of her like dialogue when Thor goes to confront her. It's just like it's just like peak Lovecraft cult leader who's, about to have their moment.
I do
Thor's like, "What the F have you done?" And she's like, "I have given our people apotheosis, and killing me will not save a world."
I
It's so
I do
melodrama.
have to really like in Ragnarok 2, The Calling, how the song switches from Loki the Odin back and forth. Where
Mm-hmm.
Loki, the terrorist, part of the terrorist who was part of the resistance, who wanted Odin to be put down and all the Asgard to die, is watching the horrors happen and be like, "Holy shit, this went too far." Meanwhile, Odin, who was supposed to be the person who opposed this, is just like, "Yes, derail the train faster."
I want it all to go badly.
Yeah.
She's just so like 1,000% down to Cthulhu. It's a fun energy, and I don't I just enjoyed that energy that the character brought to the different scenes and sequences, and how in sync it was with just like the general tone of the story overall.
So here's my thing. While Odin
Yeah.
has a beautiful voice, and I do love her voice, and her part is as the villain is very obvious from the get go, because how are you gonna have a tyrannical ruler and not have them be the villain? Come on
Oh
now,
yeah,
this is not an
1,000%.
isekai. Um, um, the thing is, it doesn't seem like she doesn't do much. She's the big bad guy that all the other characters are coming together to fight off against. But really, my thing about her, why she's so easily like brushed under the cover for me when listening to this album, is because she doesn't act. She spends the whole time staring out her window. She gives Thor some sass. She admits, "Yeah, I tortured Loki, and look how great everything's going for me now." And then she becomes one with the god who's trying to destroy the whole train. The train full of gods.
She's definitely not like the one with the interesting emotions or pathos. She's not bringing any of like the weight or gravitas of, the evil emperor of the universe in Once Upon a Time, in space. But
You know,
she's not like got any real interesting
cool.
personal connections that get explored. Loki never has a confrontation with her.
Okay, but here's the thing with King Cole. King Cole does not have a lot of like. You never see a good side to him. It mentioned that there was once one, but at least he goes out and acts. He's purposely causing turmoil in people's
Hmm.
lives. Odin's just like, "Oh yeah, I totally meant for all of this to happen," and I'm not so sure how much I believe that.
I didn't see it as her wanting this to happen. I saw it as her, I had this project. I really wanted to do this project. Turns out this is what this project was all about. I didn't know that, but I'm 1,000% on board with where we've ended up.
That's
I am
fair.
so cool with Yog Shogoth inhabiting our realm.
When Thor confronts her and says, "You knew this would happen," I just kind of took that as, oh, she did know this was going to happen, and so she was purposely leading up to this.
It's very it's a very different sort of confrontation. I mean, Thor's doing it for weird personal reasons. Yog Shogoth and Odin are just kind of doing it because this is the goal now. This is the new mission. It's not got any, it's not got the pathos, of a lot of other of these conflicts. But I don't know. I still found it engaging. I'm not looking for as much pathos,
That's
I
fair.
guess.
That's fair.
And it's not like there's a shortage of pathos running around in this. I mean, you've got like Sigyn and
Oh,
Loki running around having just the saddest arc
I,
again.
oh, their lines in the last song where they're like, "This time we'll stay." Ah, you break my heart.
It's very, I will stay by your side. Goodbye, my love. Shed no tears. The lives we've shared have brought us here. It's very, yep, tragedy. It's all going downhill.
I will stay. The last lyrics, and you like started the last verse, but the rest of the
Yeah.
last verse goes, "I will stay by your side. I'll hold on through this time, because every single time you just learn their story, and every moment they're together, they get ripped apart again and again. Sigyn thought Loki was dead this whole time. Seeing her alive, she's like, "Yes, another chance! I have a reason to continue living and not just fighting anymore." And Loki's like, "I'm not Loki. Who are you?" And there's this whole arc where Loki has to like recollect her mind because it's been broken for so long, and she's no longer sure who she is or who Sigyn is or who even Thor is by the end of it. And it's just the whole side story going with Loki piecing her mind back together and Sigyn staying by her side, protecting her the whole time. I'm a fucking sucker for that shit. Oh, I'm such a sucker for that shit.
It's the emotional core of the whole thing. It's not like Thor, who's just kind of angry the whole time and doesn't really have any positive feelings for Loki, even though that is still kind of the motivator for a lot of his actions, is positive, like loyalty to the idea of Loki and who they were, but also anger about betrayal and all that. But it's not the same as what Sigyn and Loki are bringing to the table here.
So Thor's an interesting character because we're like, you have Sigyn and Loki, and Sigyn's done horrible stuff because she thought it was right and for love. Thor's doing horrible stuff for greed, revenge, and then like some sort of morality he sees as being betrayed here. And it's Thor's an interesting character to me because I feel like it is kind of obvious that he does care about Loki, but in his mind, Loki deserved a death for they were sane and themselves. And Loki deserved to die as she was when she was supposed to be on, like, burning. Like, it doesn't say she was on a cross or anything, just burning alive, which is so gruesome. But, that's. Loki deserved to die because Balder died. And because Balder died, a life had to be paid with a life. But Odin fucked it up by torturing Loki so she no longer was who she was, and Thor sees that as a greater crime than like even taking a life. So like his sense of morality is really interesting to me.
It's definitely, I don't. It seemed very consistent with this like idea of Thor as kind of this very like egocentric kind of, not particularly revolutionary, just sort of like happy to be with where they are, and that's why they're second in charge of the tyrannical dictatorship, because Thor's looking out for number one most of the time, but they also aren't here to be down with any sort of betrayal, and that's why they're angry at Loki, and that's why they're also angry at Odin. It's a good kind of consistent internality to them, and also makes them a really a force that makes a lot of sense. Because that's also kind of the fun of these sort of tragic fairy tale, folktale stories, is this sense of inevitability, especially with the Norse, kind of stories, is this idea like, that this is what the choice that they're going to make, several several scenes before the characters actually make it. This is how Thor's going to act. They're going to go off and do the fight. They're going to go off and do the revenge, angry thing. The only thing you don't really know about Thor is who are they going to go after? Is it going to be Loki or is it going to be Odin? And by the time we're through like the first 3 tracks, you already know that Thor's got eyes on Odin.
Yeah.
And that's just how it's got to end.
I do kind of wonder though, did you expect Thor to finish the fight with killing himself and Odin in one blow?
I definitely didn't. My expectation was, I put down some predictions when like the first half is over and like the inspector has gone through the black box the first time and he's only gotten like partially understood the message. So
Yeah.
we still don't entirely understand what happened or what progressed. We just know that it got destroyed and these were the players on board the ship, which is honestly, by the way, very interesting plot structure. I really appreciate that way that like the entire first half is just backfill and character setup and like just getting all the pieces in place for like the pachinko game that is the last like half of it.
Then you get all the drama.
That it's very like it's very good. It's got that melodrama down. I keep wanting to say Shakespearean, but I think that's just how all melodrama works in this sort of tradition.
There's no shanty songs in this, but there's so many solid songs that are even just giving you context.
It's good at giving you emotions and good songs and also a lot of, useful information all at once. It's good storytelling. It's very interesting. Anyway, where was I going? What were we talking about before I went on the tangent about how, interesting the album writing was?
Well, you were going on about some predictions you had made about the ending.
Oh, yes. I thought the ending was either Odin did it for some reason. Odin was responsible for the destruction of the Bifrost, and she knew what she was doing and would ended up with the destruction of the Bifrost. And that's why we had the, like, horror game, death screen that they described where, like, the end of the black box was just, like, 10 straight minutes of Odin's face smiling at the camera, which was excellent imagery, by the way. Really good planting. Well, the second listen through, I really understood, like, I already identified that on the first listen through, like, oh, that's really good horror visual storytelling. It really makes me kind of interested to see how this would look if it was adapted into a kind of visual form. But also, in hindsight, good planting for the Lovecraft storytelling, because there's a lot of that going on too, especially in the language, but also in these like brief moments of images. Anyway, I thought that could mean that maybe it was Odin's fault, and then I thought maybe it was like a heroic sacrifice that somebody made that would result in the Bifrost being destroyed. Kind of right, but also wrong there. Heroic sacrifice that resulted in the Bifrost not getting destroyed. But as far as like Thor's fight with Odin / Jormungandr goes, I had no fragging clue, truth be told. I figured that Thor was probably going to, like, I assumed Thor was going to win just because closest thing to a good guy in the fight. And, since we're dealing with Norse mythology, I didn't expect it, and I was surprised by, but not like taken aback by Thor ending it by killing himself, because it also seemed just like something the mechanisms would throw into their stories.
See, so I heard one of the last songs first.
Oh yeah?
And that was the goodbye. So I knew Loki and Thor were going off to different sides of this fight from the beginning. And then I went back and listened to the rest of the album. And I just assumed Sigyn had died and Loki was going to go avenge her. And then we got to that part and then I got to that part and I realized, oh no, this is Thor going to end it. Oh, he's not coming back. When they're saying die with honor, die with peace, I knew neither of them were coming back at that point. Like, that's what those lines mean. Shit, this is a final goodbye.
Uh-oh, looks like things are going sideways for our heroes.
Yeah, it's just, I thought maybe, the first time I heard the song without any other context, I thought maybe they were saying goodbye because their friendship was over, and these were the two different paths that they had to take to live the rest of their lives out. And then you hear the rest, and you're like, oh shit, no, everyone's dying here. That sucks.
That totally makes sense.
And I know. I feel like, in a way, it still kind of is Loki and Thor just admitting their lives have gone two different ways, and that they're never going to see each other again. Even though they clearly know they're both going to die. If this was another context, I feel like the two still would have had the same meaning even without death immediately right after. Like, if they had died, like, years later, it still would have been their own two separate lives completely detached from one another now.
Yeah, that totally makes sense, and that's sort of the energy off of it. I look forward to re-listening to this, because that's kind of what I felt I guess I was missing in my first two listens, was just more sense of, like, this kind of dynamic between Thor and Loki, because that's sort of what is there and very solid and a powerful bit of like the melodrama is this idea of the relationship between the two of them.
Yeah.
But it's also the one that kind of gets the least amount of backfill. We really don't know much about what Loki was like before things, like not even just before the mind wipe. We know that they became like, a terrorist, presumably because they figured out that Yog-Sothoth was not like a good thing to fiddle with.
Yeah.
But even before that, when they were like buddies with Loki and they were working with Odin as part of the construction of the Bifrost, we don't really get much of a sense of what their dynamic was prior to that,
It almost
and what the absence of that has done to them.
maybe this is because of personal experiences, but to me, listening to the soundtrack, it almost felt like to me that they were friends who had so much bitterness and anger, and their last interaction ended so horribly that they couldn't really come back from that.
Mm-hmm.
And while they still saw each other as friends, there was something unsaid between them that had permanently changed. And they never got that discussion. And that discussion is coming out in the final goodbye, where there's so much more to say, but they don't have time. So it's just, I hope you die the way you wanted to and the way you deserve. And I hope you also do that. Holy shit, this is depressing. But it really does feel like a friendship that has been twisted, so focusing on it and the past of it won't do anything but confuse it more for what it is now.
That does make sense. I get that, and that's definitely a lot of where I was kind of getting off of the story. Hey, are you putting your hand on the table a lot or something? I keep hearing like a bouncing in your audio. Like
no,
something
I'm
is
not
getting...
putting my hand on the table. My cord is wrapping against the side of the chair.
Oh, I see.
That's what's going on.
Okay,
Sorry.
Okay.
I'm not trying to be distracting. It just happens because I move the talk.
I just keep imagining going through the editing and listening to the bounce a bunch.
It doesn't matter where I put it, it's gonna do it. That's why I don't use these headphones anymore.
Oh boy. Oh well, we'll deal. I'll deal.
So, do you mind if we jump to a topic that you brought up in your notes?
Yeah.
About Sigyn and Loki's death and the trope of bury your gays, and if this
order
qualifies
means
or
nothing.
Not.
Let's just jump into the fun stuff that we want to talk about here. We got no time for wasting time.
Well, we were already focusing on like Thor and Loki's individual death and the death of their relationship. So I really wanted to talk about that and what you think of it, because that was a really interesting take to read in your notes.
Of which take? Which take in particular? You mean the bury your gays bit?
How Loki and Sigyn both die, but it doesn't. But you thought it didn't feel like bury your gays.
Well, it's funny because after two for two, the Mechanisms albums have ended with like tragic love stories between two women that like are kind of destined to miss each other twice over. Once, as their romance is bloomed, and again as they meet in the end during the time in which the song and the album actually takes place. It's emotionally impactful both times. Some of the best songs from both albums both times, and also kind of the core positive emotional, if it can be said to be positive, like emotional arc of both stories. And again, both end with death, like separation between these two, queer lovers by death. And the kind of stereotypical, like, tropey analysis of it is that this qualifies as the bury your gays trope, something that we ourselves as a podcast are becoming quickly familiar with. If you've listened to the Babylon 5 season 2 episode, which came out just before this, which does definitely do some, what I think is undeniably,
or the Supernatural season 1 episode, or the Supernatural season 2 episode.
Yeah, like we've seen the gays get buried before, but I don't think this counts. Is the thing.
And why is that? Because I agree with you. I also do not think this falls into the trope of bury your gays, but I want to hear your reasoning behind it first.
Well, I've never been like a TV tropes guy. Like, I absorb these notions of like these tropes through osmosis and watching way too much YouTube. But my understanding of kind of the detrimental part of bury your gays is not just gays are dying. It is also very specifically gays are dying for the express purpose of making sure you don't have to have any more gays in the future in this media, or like the implicit purpose of that. You know, there's this sense that like not only are the gays dying, but they're dying kind of needlessly, mostly for like the excuse of, again, you don't have to have gays anymore because they died and it was tragic and sad, and we're all sorry for the gays that are dead, but they're dead now. Let's move on.
Which is,
And that,
of course, a direct result of like TV law used to be if you
yeah,
had LGBT characters, they had to die to show other people that it's not a good lifestyle to live,
yeah,
that there's
definitely
consequences.
definitely ties to a lot of like media sort of codes in comics and like in film and stuff like that. And dating to the 90s where, you know, gay content was less, you know, controversial, or at least was less explicitly banned. Even the inclusion of things like lesbian characters or lesbian kisses as part of like sweeps weeks sort of, you know, publicity stunts would be accompanied by a lot of the time with this sort of barrier gaze trope. The intention being, okay, we had our gay episode, we got the gay ratings just for the drama and the excitement of doing it, but now let's get rid of that. Let's not touch it again. But I don't think that applies here. I'm sure that barrier gaze is a trope that can occur in a single solitary work, like in a film or an album. But I think it's a lot trickier to identify because, of course, there is no future with a film or an album. This is a self contained story. And I think that the argument becomes even weaker if the emotional connection and the tragedy of this disconnection is the intended part of the story. It's not like this is as close to queer romance as we're allowed to get, is something tragic. It's more like, no, we're going with queer romance that is tragic. That is our, like, that is not something that we feel we have to settle with or we're eager to settle with because we don't want to go further. This is just like part of it. And that's what I think they're doing here. And then another thing that I think helps their case as well is just that like this isn't a context in which you see queer romance all that often. Like how many times have you seen like queer Loki? Don't answer that question. Before this year, how many times have you seen queer space Loki? How many times have you seen queer fairy tale characters? And how many times have you seen tragic stories around that emotional connection?
So personally, for me, my answer would probably be more than the average person because not only do I read like a lot of queer content, but I read a lot of very specifically fairy tales with a twist content. It's like one of the niches I love. So I've actually seen like mythology characters brought into new medias, comics, and written novels and such with like some of them being queer already, but I don't feel as if like queer Loki is all that uncommon as far as like queer mythological characters go because there's so many instances of it in the actual myths.
Oh, that's very true.
But that's just for me. Like I also feel like queer Apollo is really common as well because there's actual written instances of him attracting both men and women and sleeping with them both.
So I'll ask you then, you know, you who exist kind of outside the context where this seems like a novel thing, and also, you know, outside the context where this seems like, well, maybe not necessarily outside, but not to the same extent. This seems kind of like a distinct and unique approach, and in a media environment that is not particularly saturated with this sort of story that is deep, crazy, intense genre fiction, and is also really gay, and is also really tragic. It, you know, by the way, being really tragic and also being about Norse folklore is like kind of an obligation,
Yeah, like you
frankly. If you
gotta
ask
have
me,
you gotta.
that's the point. And also the Shakespearean melodrama of it all also got to be like there's a lot of elements here that are like tragic in their foundation that like build to a tragic love story, and it just happens to be queer here.
And all of that is true, but what was the question you were getting at? Because you started
Sorry.
saying something and then you got
Yeah.
off track.
I like to distract people with my sentences that go in different directions. So if the people have picked up their brains and tried to get the Yog Shoggoth out of them, what I was going to say was okay, so you come from a context where queer romance is a lot more common in these fairy tale retellings. You come from a context where you've seen a lot more of this sort of stuff, so it's not so unique and it doesn't have the defense that is kind of pushing a novel perspective. Why do you think that this doesn't count as bury your gaze?
So, and this comes with slight spoilers. There's other stuff I'm going to introduce you to created by some of the same people in this band that also have tragic queer romances that end with one or both dying.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been a couple instances where that has happened and they've been accused of falling into the bury your gaze trope. But I don't think those qualify for the same reason I don't think this qualifies. Everybody dies. Almost everyone dies. And you hear everybody dying in this. So just because your queer characters also died does not mean it was automatically bury your gaze, because no one survives this. This is a story where no one gets to live in the end except for the mechanisms, and they take off, and several of them are queer too. So technically queer characters survived, it's just they weren't the focus of the story. But that's like the main reason why I would argue that this does not fall into the bury your gaze trope, because again, everyone dies. No one got to make it out. It wasn't for the explicit purpose of hurry and kill your gay characters so other people know that it's not good to be gay, which is bullshit. Or like, yeah, we've had our gay characters, we don't need any more. This is the end of the tale, and this is just how it goes. And ultimately, Loki and Sigyn have the most fleshed out relationship of everybody else on this train. Like, Thor is supposed to be Odin's son, but he never calls her mother or acknowledges his position. He's second in line for the throne of Asgard, but that's because he's Odin's son. It's not because he had to do anything super horrendous or special to get that position. He was just born to it. And that doesn't even get touched upon. It could have, like, focused more on the mother and son fight at the end or anything, but no, it chose to continuously go back to Sigyn and Loki and how much they love each other and how they're able to heal from their tragic past because they are together, even if it's not fully. Loki's able to regain her sense of self because she knows right now who she is, even if bad things have happened in her past.
Yeah.
And I love that. I feel like so much of the emotional value of the story and core come from Loki and Sigyn that you couldn't bury your gaze in this if you wanted to. Death does not bury them in the end, because no matter how many times you listen to it, it's so blatant and obvious, and they're wives, and they love each other. And it's just so perfect. And that's why I don't think it falls in the bury your gaze. That's also why I don't think some of their other content falls in the bury your gaze.
I don't know. It's good and compelling, and I don't think that at any, like you said, nothing's getting buried here. This is the center stage. This is the point.
Yeah, death does not always equal burying, and that's something I've seen a lot in, like, fandom context. Whereas if your queer character dies, it automatically equals the gays are being buried. And while that has happened a lot, and there's a lot of precedents for it, I'm not arguing that that's not a thing. It very clearly is. Supernatural.
Babylon 5.
It's not all deaths are that, is basically all I'm saying. Sometimes you're allowed to have tragic endings, and it sucks because if you want a happy ending for your queer characters, there's a lot more tragic context than there is happy context, and I'll acknowledge that, and that sucks for people who just want happy queer fluff, but more is getting made. We're not going to take a step back in society and suddenly start condemning the queer community again. There are definitely people who will always try, but fuck them. That's why the queer community has to stand together. That's why all the LGBTQs and everyone else has to be on the same side.
And of course there are also, people out there that would like the hardcore genre fiction tragic, queer romance, that is their bag, that's the queer representation that they want, then they like more of it.
Personally, I just like sad shit. I like stuff that ends in tragic romances. Like, I don't like romance. I really, really, really do not like reading romance. It annoys the shit out of me when the whole story is focused around a romance, because then you don't get to see the characters act with anybody else in a context outside of, oh, is it gonna be a love triangle? I don't care. I don't care. I don't care if these two end up together. If they do, that's cool, but, like, could we get more? And then this, I feel like you kind of get more. It's all short. You get the basic dynamics between everyone, and there's not a lot of time to spend. This all already happened, so this is what you get. And it's tragic, and I love that shit.
Man.
I am definitely an angst fiend. Even in fan fiction, I really like reading angsty shit. I don't know why. There's probably something wrong with me, but it's so cathartic. Like, there's so much catharsis to it. This is why I think I love Antigone when I was in theater class. I loved Antigone.
Big fan of the tragedy of Antigone.
Oh, big fan of the tragedy of Antigone.
Man, who's surprised that the anthropologist is a big fan of the tragedy of Antigone?
Excuse me, what does anthropology have to do with it? It's just a perfect tragic tale. And yeah, there's some unsavory elements in it, but like,
That's the Greeks for you, man.
It's the Greeks. What are you expecting from me, okay?
Oh, boy. Well, it's fun. It's just a fun overall thing. Meanwhile, back in our lane, it's a fun story. Just overall. The mechanisms, the people behind them, they do good storytelling. They get their melodrama down. They get their genre fiction down. They just put some cool, fun stuff together, and the music is bops, y'all. If you want to just listen to a couple of tracks, what are some good recommends? I mean,
on Genius Lyrics, it says the most listened to and looked at song on this album is Loki, which is the 4th track and the introduction to what's going on with Loki's identity crisis. I always recommend that, and like Strange Meaning, Ragnarok 3, but you should listen to the other 2 Ragnaroks before you get to that as well.
Just listen to the whole Ragnarok sequence, frankly. All 5 of them are solid.
So good.
I also, again, I can't not recommend Odin as just excellently performed and just a great bop, and also some great foreshadowing in that track too. They start throwing in some very Lovecraftian diction, like Chromatic Night and The Place Where the Void Sings will answer its call. It's very, ooh, you know what you're doing. I love that you know what you're doing. You went back and made it sure that we all knew you knew what you were going with.
If you wanna if you wanna ever try animating to something that's just tragic and like devastating, look up Terminus. Terminus is is like half screams and half song.
It's all epilogue. It's great.
It's all epilogue, and I don't know. I'm surprised I haven't seen more people like animate or like draw storyboards to this, because it has such a specific like, oh, this would be visually like eye-catching.
Yeah, it's very like at the start of the 80s Transformers movie where we see Unicron come in and just wipe out one of those like living worlds for the first time. It's got that same sort of energy of like, oh wow, watch an entire civilization be rendered to ruins by a force beyond its kin.
Forgot about that.
Ooh man, let's get sad and watch the first Transformers movie. And it's funny that you like it so much, because Terminus, it really reminds me of the epilogues to Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds that we'll be listening to for the next episode, because it also does kind of the 2 epilogue things, the one epilogue with the narrator and the other with like the story as it makes its logical conclusion. Like it's got that same energy, and I hope that you enjoyed the Jeff Wayne epilogues as much.
I probably will.
I also hope that you like very repetitive instrumental sections that are full of like very electric guitar, because that is also a lot of Jeff Wayne.
I mean, I like instrumentals, so we'll see.
I really dug it. I thought it was all synth until I saw the Broadway stage performance of it. And I was like, oh, that's just a bunch of guitars doing weird stuff? Cool for... Good for the guitars.
It's too good to be synth. What do you mean? It's too good not to be synth. What do you mean? Look at this.
No, it couldn't be instruments. It has to be synth. The perfect instrument. The only good instrument on this planet.
So we're winding down a little bit now. We've got 30 minutes left. So I want to know, what are your thoughts on this one compared to the last album that we listened to?
Well, it's definitely a lot less complicated. You know, the last one was kind of ironically a saga. You know, it really, like, okay, here is several decades worth of like montages and character setup and like
every song
flashing.
has a different place that it's happening at.
Yeah, there are like a half dozen different characters, each with their own kind of perspective tied to this, you know, red wedding, and everything is got, you know, their own backstory, and you're constantly getting flagged down by a bunch of different, you know, fairy tale references that are all coming at you at once. And that's not to bag on it by any means. Bops left and right and Once Upon a Time in Space. But it's also like a much crunchier sort of story, if like that sort of terminology makes sense. You know, the Bifrost Incident, you know, Taylor, it really struck me as kind of well, lighter, truthfully. You know, it kind of was a B movie. Like, here's a small cast of characters, each with a specific kind of interest, watches things go awry when the bad thing shows up.
There is a moment where you do get a bunch of like side characters and their deaths as like Sigyn and Loki run through the different train cars trying to get away.
Mm-hmm.
Frey and Freya pass and...
It's kind of the one montage moment, and that's sort of like as the madness is spreading, as people are doing all sorts of crazy stuff.
Garm and, who was it? Garm, like, so two people break out into a fight against each other in the middle of this madness, and one of them's named Garm, and I don't remember the other one. But as their weapons hit, they collide into one person and die.
It's very like...
Oh, it's so dark. I'm sorry, I know I'm laughing. It's just an internal, like, automatic reflex, the dark shit.
It's fun. I mean, it's... Even the darkness is melodrama. It's very cartoony, like, oh no, somebody is now part of the ship. Oh no, somebody has stabbed you in the heart while you've been stabbed in the face. It's...
Do you know why Freya died that way? Freya died by
part of the ship.
Freya died becoming part of the ship because in the actual tale of Ragnarok, she does not appear. So this is getting rid of her appearance. So her body can't be found.
Woof.
It's a callback to like how she just doesn't show up in Ragnarok.
I didn't know that.
Oh, there's so much. That's why Baldur was killed by mistletoe, because it sounds like mistletoe, and in the hey, stop scratching. And in the legend, Loki kills him with a dart full of mistletoe.
Of course he does. That's hilarious. I love that.
Yes. So there's a lot of like little stuff like that sprinkled all in that I love.
It's fun stuff. I mean, if this is your bag, you know, it wouldn't hurt to give it a listen through.
I understand why you like this one better than Once Upon a Time in Space.
I would say better, but I definitely there's definitely a lot of stuff here that I just like. I don't know. I imagine I'll be listening to a lot of those tracks too. You know, definitely like Pump or whatever it was called.
The Space Shanty.
The Space Shanty was a lot of fun. But there was a lot of this that I just connected with. I like simple things. I like B movies, and I like how this one does the Lovecraft turn really well. And the melodrama is still there and doing its thing.
So a part of me really likes Once Upon a Time in Space more. And the reason for that is because, like, again, I'm a sucker for classic fairy tales. And I'm also, I don't really enjoy things that have to do with Cthulhu.
Oh, yeah?
I just don't. There's so much I know about, like, the original creator of Cthulhu that just... always seems to come out and works inspired by it that I don't really enjoy it, but none of that really comes out here. It's a short, nice album where like there's a Cthulhu inspired monster at the end, but that's really all you got.
I mean, it's so funny that they didn't. I think what I love most about the turn was that they didn't like make up a critter. It's just ᴗᴗᴗᴗᴖᴗᴖ, which is just a Lovecraft critter.
It's just ᴗᴗᴗᴗᴗ. It's a new
It's just
god to kill all the
ᴗᴗᴗᴗ.
other gods.
It's just some nerd back there at the mechanisms was like, ᴗᴗᴗᴗᴗ is a rainbow. Hey, I got a great idea.
So so Johnny DeVille, the guy who plays
name.
Johnny DeVille in the mechanisms,
Yeah.
also is Johnny Sims, and in a podcast I'm gonna have you watch eventually. We'll listen to eventually. That's really good. That's all about Cthulhu monsters come to life, and their separate realms.
Oh no! Wait for a second there. You made it sound like it was like, like it was like some sort of like teen romance sort of dark reimagining of the Lovecraft mythos. Like
No,
Cthulhu High.
it's very much Cthulhu inspired monsters trying to come to Earth, and when they get there, they split it up into different realms for each of them.
Uh-oh, it's a Secret Wars. You did a Secret Wars. Don't do a Secret Wars, kids.
It actually just ended. I think either at the beginning of 2021 or at the end of 2020. So, I think it ended in March of 2021. Oh gosh, I can't believe it's already August.
Oh man, yeah. Oh, dude.
I think you'll really enjoy that because it has a lot of the same feelings that the Bifrost Incident definitely brings to the table when you're listening.
I don't know. Now I'm really excited about the Cthulhu equivalent of Riverdale, and I really want to see somebody do that. Could somebody do that? Like, could some of like the ghostwriters that worked on that one that one parody book that what was it called? Lindsay Ellis and Nella Antonella were behind it. It was like a group ghost written project. It was just Twilight but with Cthulhu.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
It was this weird parody novel that they put together. They did like a whole YouTube series just like of the behind the scene production of it. It was hilarious. I haven't read it, but just like watching the story of it was hilarious. I just want to do that, but with like the whole
I actually have a Cthulhu inspired 20-sided die. Just
lingering around.
Yeah.
I think it's exerting an influence on this podcast at this point, frankly.
I don't really like things that are inspired by Cthulhu because I have like so many issues with the original context. But it's kind of hard to get away from it when you're really into angsty shit.
Yeah,
angsty,
Howard
creepy
did
shit.
really. He left an influence on genre fiction angsty stuff because
it's almost like the same way Tolkien left an influence on fantasy. It's like no matter where I go, these old white men left influences on things I love in ways I cannot stand. And like I admire Tolkien and his work, but like they're not races, they're species. There's a difference.
We can't get on this. It's a sci-fi episode. It's a sci-fi summer. We gotta get away from. We'll do it. We'll get back to that. We're bagging on Howard right now.
Okay, but
you can
like
leave
the
Jay
idea
away.
that something, an unstoppable force is going to come and destroy everything isn't even like originally Cthulhu. It's appeared in like science fiction before that, but Cthulhu was the popular one.
Of course it was. Of course it was.
It's the concept of like. It's basically Cthulhu fulfilled the role that the Christian God used to fulfill in a lot of religious texts, where this is an all-powerful, all-knowing being that will consume everything one day, and that'll be the end, and that's when like we'll rise from our graves, or what the fuck is that called? Yeah. Oh man, I haven't been religious in years. I don't remember.
Oh well. Depending on who you ask, if it's the Catholics, it's the rapture.
Rapture!
If it's the Protestant, it's the second comings. What you described sounds a lot more like the Adventist end of the world, actually, than the rapture.
Honestly, I've been to so many different churches. It could have been any of them.
Like, in the Adventist tradition, the idea is not like, oh, one day all the good people will vanish and everyone else will be trapped on Earth, which is hell, or whatever. In the Adventist tradition, the idea is that, like, if you die, you're dead. and then the second coming comes around, and if you're going to get the good after, if you're going to get an afterlife at all, like it's either you get an afterlife or you're just dead. Like when the second coming happens, you'll just pop out of your grave and then like walk along with everybody else up to the, up to heaven. And that's the notion.
Judaism has the belief for like once you die, you rest in your grave waiting for judgment, and judgment won't come until the final messenger of God comes.
It's not too dissimilar, truthfully. The same metaphor of sleep, death as sleep until, until the
Basically,
thing happens.
that's what happens here. Sigyn and Loki sing until they sleep, and then death consumes everyone.
Yeah, woof.
How long do you think they lasted?
I like to imagine that they lasted for a while. I was kind of picturing like, well, my first thought was actually like, oh, well, actually this isn't too bad. 80 years hooked to a machine isn't great, but also 80 years with your love hooked to a machine, it could be worse. And then like Loki started fading and was like, oh no. Oh right, the engine was unconscious when they found the first one, so Loki's going to be unconscious and Sigyn's going to be alone. And then you brought up probably starved to death, and I was like, shoot.
Oh shit, that's right. Okay, but what's worse, Sigyn starving to death before this ever happened, before like all this ever comes about, or Sigyn having survived and she got off the train the moment it got to the other side and took off to the end of the universe without Loki?
I just don't see her doing that. I think after 80
see
years
her
being
doing
with a
that
loved
either.
one, like watching them slowly die and then watching them finally like croak, I just don't think I'd care. Like even if I was trying to prevent like some existential threat, I think at that point I'd be like, I did my job. I did the work. Anything, I got you guys, most of a century. I just lost the only person that mattered. I'm gonna peace out to that. I'm
I'm gonna peace out to death.
I'm
Bye.
gone. Yeah.
Oh man, I can't imagine her leaving either. I think she absolutely stayed with Loki until she also passed.
Oh yeah. Like whether it was within 20 minutes or 20 years, I think that's just how you gotta imagine it goes, and that's I think the implication.
And the whole thing where like Sigyn was trying to make sure Loki lived for as long as possible because she wanted Loki to live her life, and only hooked up one wire to her, and that still was enough to knock Loki out. Like, she tried.
Oh, it's
Why you gotta be like this?
woof. It's a sad.
So, do you think? So I actually had another question comparing like Once Upon a Time in Space to this.
Let's do one more.
But I can't remember what exactly it was. It's the bad thing.
That is a problem here.
So I feel like this is a really unique way of storytelling in a musical album. Like it's almost like a combination of a podcast and a musical album. What do you think about that?
I'm not sure I understand the comparison, truth be told. This seems like a pretty straightforward, like, kind of space opera, rock opera story. I mean, there are things, like I said earlier, the structure of the actual, how the story is told is interesting. The way that, like, the first half is introduction and backfill, and the last half is, oh, and this is the twist, let's see what happens, let's see what happens as things play out. It's very, like, yeah, that's interesting plot structure. I'm not sure what sort of act structure that follows, but it does, like, it's interesting and it engages my brain. But in terms of like the actual like method by which the story is told, like I didn't see anything that was too out of left field. Like every song is telling the story from the perspective of a character. The narrator comes in with primarily prose based explanation. And as a character, and the idea of like an investigative framing story that goes back through like decades of radio plays, like that's a very old tradition. So what was it about it that made you think podcast to you?
How often the narrator comes in and just talks about what's happening in the current timeline and like what's happening in the current moment. It feels like there was a lot of talking on this album compared to like the last one. That really gave me a podcasty vibe, but maybe that's because I've heard the podcast where the narrator is the narrator in the actual podcast and uses the exact same voice because Johnny mastered this voice and he uses it always.
I mean, does that podcast also have musical interludes? I'd be surprised if it didn't, frankly, at this point.
Uh, not like full on out characters are singing the songs. It's got music in it.
It's instrumental, though.
For the most part, yeah.
Well, I can see why that would be the connection you made. I mean, I'm making the connection to like 40s and 50s radio dramas because, you know, for like several years of my life going to school every morning, I was listening to a bunch of those in my grandpa's car.
That's fair.
So that's like where my brain goes when it comes to primarily dialogue and prose-based storytelling in an audio-only format. But, you know, that you went to podcasts totally makes sense. That's frankly a lot more on point for what actually is the media that is probably influencing this directly.
So last time you talked a lot about how you didn't really like Johnny's voice. But this is Johnny narrating.
Well, it's not Johnny in the character of Johnny. It's the voice of Johnny, maybe. And even that I can make some arguments against, you know? For all the talk of the mechanisms being like the diegetic singers of all the songs, that doesn't actually seem to be evident here. This seems like it is being sung by the lieutenant, and this is like his perspective as he's giving it in his frame story. I've not gotten the sense that there's like a hidden meta frame story of the mechanisms actually being the ones singing the song.
No, it's just it's not that it's the mechanisms are the ones singing the song. It's that this is the same guy. The lieutenant is played by the same guy who does Johnny DeVille.
But it's a different, I don't know, different character. I think that if I listen to them again, I'll probably be like less put off by the mechanisms. I think I was just not in the mood for them. Like when I was listening to Once Upon a Time in Space, I was just like,
to know more about the space drama and not like the mechanisms
get
coming
me back to the space opera and like the Warhammer fanfic. That was where I wanted to be.
Wait, Warhammer fanfic.
Yeah, Warhammer fanfic. Immortal. We've been over this. Immortal emperor kept alive through nefarious means, exerting an imperial will.
Dude, I've never played Warhammer. I forgot that was a thing in it.
No real good guys. A lot of inspiration from certain bits of German history.
I do like how you call Loki and the Midgardian resistance and those terrorists, but that's not what you called Red Rose and Snow White and Cinder Ashes in the last one.
You know, terrorists seem to be a common thread of this, of the mechanisms. I'm sure that the FBI.
That's because they are terrorists. That's because the mechanisms themselves are terrorists. They come in, fuck shit up, and leave.
To be terrorists, they seem just like, you know, they're like
wars. They like fighting.
They're just like fifth dimensional imps wandering around looking to have a good time. They're like adventuring parties that have hit epic levels in earlier editions where there's nothing to do but faff around and see what, you know, crazy stuff you can make happen.
Fair enough. That's fair.
But, oh man.
My cats are play fighting in the room. That's why they're running around.
My cat was just whining at the door wanting to be let in. I'm sure that she wants some attention after being in the kennel all weekend.
Oh no. Okay, so is there anything else you want to talk about?
No, I think that we've really gotten through and covered it all from a lot of, you know, from all the angles that I think are for fun. You know, I had a good time. I think you had a good time.
I did.
You know, sharing it. You know, if it was fun and pleasant. It was a fun and pleasant time. You know, I'll probably try listening to this again on shuffle in the future.
So, as far as like my reflection goes, my opinion on this hasn't really changed a lot. Mm-hmm. I still really enjoy it. I really enjoy the song. As the most my opinion could have changed was like on the Odin conversation. Did Odin actually know this was the plan the whole time, or like was she just going with it? That might be the only thing my mind has changed a little on. But otherwise, this is still just like a fucking awesome album I love listening to, and I'm happy it was my introduction, even though it confused the shit out of me.
my thoughts and comments. Like I said, I love, like, I enjoy what they're doing. I enjoy like the very sci-fi, very folklore, and also at once very very Lovecraft the way they do the story. I mean, the plot structure I've already talked about before, but also the way that they take a very kind of, you know, similar to Once Upon a Time in Space kind of premise, like, okay, we're going to do the space tyranny based off of, fairy tales and fables, but this time it's going to be, Norse mythology. And also, because we want to keep things interesting, what also has this sense of like dread and inevitable demise at the hands of greater beings beyond our kin?
What?
Lovecraft. And also
Oh,
there's this
yeah.
rainbow commonality. Let's just throw that in there. And then they nail it. Like, the whole thing is just like excellently gets down the pacing of your sort of classic Lovecraft kind of story.
I
And
cannot
also
wait until we get to the Greek mythology disc.
oh my goodness. I'm not sure I'm ready for that. I'm not sure I'm ready for that one.
Oh, I cannot wait.
I had fun. It was fun. I think if you enjoy listening to stuff like this podcast, you will probably be the sort of person that likes plugging that into your Spotify at some point, or YouTube, or whatever. I It's got some bops. Go listen to Odin. It's good.
Or the farewell of two friends saying
Or
their
the
last
farewell to,
goodbyes.
yeah, or listen to like the Ragnarok, big ending extravaganza. Ah, boy.
Oh man. Okay, so what are we doing next week, Noah?
Like I've said before, the next episode, which you'll be getting in a couple of weeks here, in episode release time and streaming time, we will actually be recording it next week. We've changed the schedule, but we'll elaborate on that in the future. Suffice it to say,
Don't worry about it.
don't worry about it right now. If you're listening to this as a pod, it's already happened. Don't need to matter. If you're watching this live right now, we're still going to be recording every week for a while yet, so don't even worry about that. Next week, Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds. It's also from the 70s. It's also a sci-fi album. Well, it is from the 70s. It is also kind of a sci-fi album. It's based off of earlier stories, in this case, H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. And it's fun. Do you like synthy sort of guitar sounds? That's what this has got. And also maybe some commentary about how humans are kind of terrible, or at least have like a hidden terribleness inside of them that disasters bring out.
I've honestly not listened to synthetic guitars as often as I've listened to synthetic violins, because I own a synthetic violin and I don't own a synthetic guitar.
I would like to get an electric guitar at some point. Maybe just to play some music from this, truthfully, because it's got some. I really enjoy a lot of the tunes from this.
I'll practice my violin. You practice your guitar. We'll try and do one of these songs together at some point.
I really enjoy this next one. And like I said, I really love like the sci-fi story. I love the tone of the War of the Worlds as a sci-fi story. It's something that I've kind of adapted in my own art before, and so I like this adaptation that's pretty straightforward. And I also like how they take a moment to pause and do the turnaround that I really like about H.G. Wells' writing. That, as I understand, I'm actually reading War of the Worlds, the novel, for the first time as prep for this. But the thing I understand about like H.G. Wells that's been included in a lot of adaptations is just this one kind of episode between the main character and another human survivor. And this sort of moment where you realize that Wells has this really keen understanding of kind of an unnamed beast hiding within a lot of kind of human reactions to uncertainty and crisis. The track in particular, to look forward to it if you're listening along, is called Brave New World. So when you get to that in the album, know that that's kind of one of my favorites, just for the philosophy. And also it's kind of a scary bop, if you know what I mean. Like, oh, there's scary stuff going on here, but also the music's really good.
If it's supposed to be scary, I'm not gonna lie, I probably won't be scared by it.
Not like terror, raise your heart, like raise your pulse scary, but more like philosophically, existentially, like, oh no, you don't mean that, do you? Oh no, the dread, horrible thing that lies within the essential nature of humanity has risen again. I don't like that. I don't like it. Put it away.
They're
It rhymes
running
with
on my desk.
trashism.
I'm sorry, they're running on my desk now. They want attention.
Oh boy. It starts with an F and it rhymes with trashism, kids.
Oh, fuck. So we're gonna be talking about fascism. I don't know if y'all have noticed yet on this podcast, but we are both very far from fascists.
Oh boy. We like to bash in our spare time. I hope y'all have had a good time. This has been just sort of a fun, positive evening. For moi, I know it's been the same for my host, I suspect. In the interim, who has my host been, actually?
I've been Tag Eyes for 5.
And I have been Noah, and I've been your newbie.
Oh my gosh. I'm actually surprised it doesn't become more depressing.
Yeah, when I decided that, when we decided I was going to catch the Bifrost Incident, a thing that I have now caught, I was kind of expecting something like colder and more like grim. Just something about the name made me think, oh, this is going to be kind of quiet melodrama between the characters. When he first brought it up, when he first mentioned it months and months, possibly a year ago, when he first brought up the notion, I thought, oh, this is gonna be some quiet train drama, something.
I remember because I was telling you about it and I couldn't remember the name, and you figured out the name from the description. Because it was Norse mythology and it was on a train and I couldn't remember what the train was called.
It's funny when you said some sort of train. Whenever I think train story, I think quiet mainly. I think a quiet mystery on the train. I didn't expect, blood, guts, and ᴗᴗᴖᴗᴖᴗ.
You expected the Orient Express, not Clue.
Yes. I expected Poirot in space. Instead, I got ᴗᴗᴗᴗ.
For now, this is gonna be all. Good night, everybody.
Everybody have a good evening. Take care of yourself.
Thank you for watching the video. If you liked our discussions on the Bifrost Incident album, please subscribe to support our channel. Likes are wonderful and greatly appreciated too. If you want to see these episodes get made before they go up on YouTube, we now record one every 2 weeks on our Twitch channels in the link in the description below. We record the episode on both channels at 9 p.m. and the day of the week changes because I do a new job now. But how did you all come across the mechanisms? What do you think about Loki and Sigurd's final moments?